R.G. LeTourneau was a businessman during the Great Depression, and he dropped out of school when he was 14, but he actually went on anyway to invent these machines that would change the world. He invented 70% of the earth-moving equipment that was used during World War II. So a lot of people would just be focused on building a business and making money, and that would be sort of the fulfillment of their hopes. But for him, that was just a part of what he wanted and the legacy he ultimately left behind. His mission and what he wanted to do was to point people to Jesus, and that was in everything that he tried to do, including in his business. He tried to live out the verse from Matthew. It says, "But seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be given to you as well." He wanted to go into full-time ministry at one point, and he went to his pastor who gave him some advice and said, "God needs businessmen too." So he focused on his inventions, and he created huge profits for his company using his heavy equipment for road construction and leveling. Within a few years, he had moved from a small amount of money to more than $1 million in income. So in 1935, LeTourneau's wife decided to suggest to him an idea that sounds kind of radical, which was to stop giving 10% to God, but to give 90%, and for them to keep only 10% of his income. After that, Mr. LeTourneau was fond of saying, "It's not how much of my money I give to God, but it's how much of God's money that I keep for myself." So sometimes LeTourneau would do things that drove his accountants crazy. Like just before the Great Depression, they had this construction job and it went bad, and his company was left with $100,000 in debt. But he worked to pay back that debt, and not only that, he had already pledged $5,000 to missions that year, and he insisted his company fulfilled that pledge. So when World War II began, the military started calling up men to serve in the military as chaplains, and LeTourneau saw this and decided to do the same thing for his workers in his factories and plants. He decided to use company time and his own money, and he hired 3 full-time chaplains to serve in his manufacturing plants. LeTourneau called this Christianity with its sleeves rolled up. That choice to share his faith with his workers had long-lasting effects on their lives. And if that was just a story, then that would be a great story and a way to share your faith. But for me, it has more importance because Mr. LeTourneau's choices to share his faith with his workers affected my family. My grandfather grew up and was a teenager during the time of the Depression. And as best I know from his family, I think they may have called themselves Christians, but they weren't actively living out their faith, and they did not go to church. So my pop, after he was discharged from the military in World War II, went to work for one of LeTourneau's plants in Toccoa, Georgia. They actually started a program when he was there that would let you make a choice at lunchtime. You could decide if you wanted to go off and have lunch on your own as you normally would, or you could be paid for your lunchtime, and you could also go to a Bible study during that lunchtime. And he chose to do that, probably for financial reasons. And it was through that Bible study, probably led by one of those chaplains, that he decided to surrender his life to Christ and became a Christian. After his conversion and encountering God through the Bible study at LeTourneau's plant, then my father's life was exposed to God at a younger age and made different choices in his life, probably because of that. And then for me, that looked like us from really as far back as I can remember being involved in church and being exposed to God. But I remember being a little girl, and I would be at my pop-up's house, and he would talk to me about R.G. LeTourneau as a kid, and I just think it's crazy to think of how one man's choices, they've been so far-reaching, and how even long past his death, they kind of still live on today in us.